Lindsay Carter hadn't expected the return to work to feel like this. After nearly a year of navigating sleepless nights, diapers, and the quiet chaos that came with her son Noah's arrival, stepping back into the polished glass office of Cartwright and Gold, the marketing firm where she had built her career, felt like being dropped into a life that no longer quite fit. Her eyes kept flicking to her phone, heart skipping every time the screen lit up. Though there were no emergencies, just the usual group chats and one blurry photo from home, Noah chewing on a wooden giraffe. She had done everything right, vetted agencies, run background checks, even called 2 of the references herself. The woman who came highly recommended by the agency had an impeccable resume. Her name was Amara Johnson, mid-40s, former preschool teacher, CPR certified, quiet, respectful, composed. Noah had clung to her lap, like he'd known her for years by the second day. Still, from the moment Amara stepped through the white-trimmed front door of their tidy craftsman home in Willow Ridge Park, the neighborhood had not been the same. At first, Lindsay didn't notice. She was too exhausted, too focused on juggling spreadsheets and pacifiers. But then came the subtle glances, the quiet pauses in conversation at the playground, the way Dana, her neighbor 2 doors down, always seemed to look past Amara when they crossed paths at the corner. It wasn't until the 3rd week, during an HOA meeting at the local community center, that someone said something directly, well, almost directly. "So," murmured Claire Townsend, a mother of 3 with an impressive Pilates habit and a voice as sharp as a French manicure. "You went with her, huh?" Bold move. Lindsay blinked. Her. Claire smiled politely. "Amara, that's her name, right? You never know who people really are." The words were harmless enough on the surface, but something about the way Claire said them stuck with Lindsay all night. When she came home and saw Amara cradling Noah in the rocking chair, humming some old lullaby that Lindsay didn't recognize, a whisper of doubt crept in, uninvited but persistent. A few days later, as she walked Noah in his stroller around the block, another neighbor, Joanne, stopped her in front of her rose garden. Joanne was older, known for organizing charity events and the annual street potluck. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," she began, voice low, eyes darting toward the house. "But didn't you hear about what happened before? About her?" Lindsay narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Joanne looked genuinely surprised. "You really didn't know? About the baby? The case? What case?" Joanne hesitated, wringing her hands in the sleeves of her cardigan. It was years ago, long before she ever showed up here. But people talk. You might want to look into it. Lindsay walked home in a fog, heart pounding harder with each step. She told herself it was probably gossip. Willow Ridge Park was a nice neighborhood, but people had too much time and too little to do. Rumors spread like wildfire. And yet, that night, once Noah had gone to sleep and Amara had left for the evening, Lindsay found herself sitting in bed with her laptop, typing in a few search terms: Amara Johnson nanny case, Amara Johnson baby missing. It didn't take long to find something. An old article from a local paper, a grainy photo of Amara, looking younger, eyes red-rimmed, a headline that made Lindsay's stomach turn: "Babysitter under scrutiny after toddler disappears under her watch." The child had been found safe, eventually, but the article didn't go into much detail. There were quotes from the family, vague mentions of police investigations, and a line that stuck out like a knife. No charges were filed, but questions remain. Lindsay closed the laptop, hands trembling slightly. She wanted to believe it meant nothing, that it was in the past, that it was none of her business. But when she looked down at the baby monitor and saw Noah's tiny chest rising and falling in sleep, a single thought repeated itself in her mind. What if they're right? The next morning, as she poured coffee and tried to shake the anxiety clinging to her chest, she studied Amara more carefully. The woman moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, warming bottles, folding laundry, humming as she went. Noah beamed when he saw her, chubby arms reaching for her without hesitation. "Did you live here before?" Lindsay asked casually. Amara looked up, pausing slightly. "No, I moved up from Atlanta about 2 years ago." "Do you like it here?" A small smile. "It's peaceful." Lindsay nodded, unsure how to continue. She wanted to ask, She wanted to know everything. But there was a line she couldn't cross without admitting she had already been listening to the whispers. So instead, she watched. She observed. Days passed. Amara remained the same, patient, warm, consistent. She seemed to understand Noah's moods better than anyone. She caught signs of teething before Lindsay did, calmed him from tantrums in minutes, sang to him with a gentleness that Lindsay could barely replicate on her best days. And yet, the whispers grew louder. Even her mother, who came to visit one Sunday, made a face after Amara left the room. "You're letting her watch your child?" she asked, folding her arms. "What is that supposed to mean?" Lindsay snapped, surprised at her own defensiveness. Her mother shrugged. "I'm just saying. People talk." Lindsay stood in the doorway later that evening, watching Amara buckle Noah into a stroller for a walk around the block. The two of them moved in perfect rhythm, like a dance only they knew. Still, Joanne's words echoed. She was that one from the baby case. You really didn't know. For the first time since hiring her, Lindsay wondered if she had made a mistake. Not because of what Amara had done, but because she hadn't asked. She hadn't wanted to know. And now, it seemed everyone else already did. Lindsay had always prided herself on being rational. Her career in marketing taught her to analyze facts, separate emotion from strategy, and trust data over gossip. But nothing about this situation felt like numbers or logic. After discovering the old news article, she found herself caught in a quiet but suffocating tug-of-war between what she saw every day and what people whispered when they thought she wasn't listening. She hadn't confronted Amara. Not yet. She told herself she needed more time, more proof, but the truth was harder to admit. She was afraid of what she might hear. The next few days passed under a kind of emotional haze. Lindsay went through the motions at work, replying to emails, attending meetings, pretending to focus while her thoughts remained stubbornly tethered to home. When she returned in the evenings, Amara greeted her the same way she always did. With a calm voice, a detailed rundown of Noah's day, and a home that smelled faintly of lavender and baby wipes. But now Lindsay was looking for something. Anything. A slip, a detail that didn't match. The more she searched, the more disoriented she became. There were no inconsistencies. Nothing suspicious. Noah was thriving, healthy, engaged, increasingly vocal. And Amara was always the same, unshaken, attentive, warm. The tension, it seemed, lived only in Lindsay. One Thursday evening, she sat on the living room floor with Noah while Amara washed bottles in the kitchen. The television was muted, and the only sounds were the soft clinks of dishes and Noah babbling in his own baby language as he crawled toward a plush lion. Then, without warning, he paused. He looked up, and in the clearest voice Lindsay had ever heard from him, he said, "Amara." The word hung in the air like a bell toll. Lindsay froze. She wasn't even sure she'd heard him correctly. Noah looked back at her, then toward the kitchen, where Amara was still humming softly to herself. "Amara," he repeated, louder this time, a toothy grin spreading across his face. Amara peeked around the corner, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Did he just—" Lindsay nodded, too stunned to speak. Noah giggled and clapped his hands. "Amara." The next morning, word had already traveled. Lindsay didn't know how. Maybe her mother had told someone, maybe Dana overheard. But the reactions were swift and merciless. At the Saturday farmer's market, a woman Lindsay barely knew approached her near the fruit stand and offered a brittle smile. "He said her name, huh?" The woman said, "Picking through peaches." Must mean something. First words aren't random. By Sunday, even her father had called. Not to check on her, not to see how Noah was doing, but to say that he'd heard the news. "Is that really who you want to be shaping his first memories?" he asked, voice low and disapproving. "Children know things. They absorb things." "She's good to him," Lindsay replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "He's happy." "That's not the point," he shot back. "It's what she represents." The conversation ended with him saying, "Just think about what kind of man you want your son to become." And Lindsay sitting in her kitchen, hands shaking, trying to hold back tears. She didn't want to think about what Amara represented. She didn't want to see her as a symbol of something tainted or tragic, but everyone else seemed determined to remind her. That night, after putting Noah to sleep, Lindsay finally gave in. She returned to the article, then dug deeper. She searched local court records. She found a blog post, now long archived, written by someone claiming to have known the family involved in the case. It was vague, filled with speculation and bitterness, but the tone was unmistakable. It painted Amara as both victim and scapegoat, depending on which paragraph you focused on. The official narrative was simple. A toddler under Amara's care had disappeared during an afternoon in the backyard. The family, wealthy, well-connected, had been on the edge of scandal even before the incident. The mother had a history of hospitalizations. The father traveled frequently. Amara had been with them for almost a year. When the child was found 2 days later, safe and unharmed in a nearby wooded area, the police questioned everyone. No charges were filed, but the family refused to let her return. The media, hungry for a culprit, latched onto the most sensational details. Photos of the crying mother, video clips of search parties combing the woods. Amara's name was never officially cleared, but the story faded when the child was found. The world moved on. She didn't. Lindsay stared at the screen, her heart pounding in a mix of empathy and unease. What did it mean to survive something like that? To carry the weight of a story everyone thought they knew? She shut the laptop and went downstairs. Amara was folding Noah's clothes on the couch, her movements slow and methodical. Lindsay hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, then sat beside her. "Why did you become a nanny again?" she asked, voice low. Amara looked at her for a long moment. "Because it's what I do best. You could have chosen something else. After everything." Amara smiled softly. "And let them win?" The answer was simple, firm, unapologetic. Lindsay didn't press further. She didn't need to. There was something in the way Amara spoke, without bitterness, without fear, that made Lindsay feel smaller, ashamed even for ever doubting her. Still, the tension outside their home continued to build. Another anonymous note appeared in their mailbox, just a strip of paper typed that read, "Protect your child before it's too late." Lindsay crumpled it and threw it in the trash. But the unease didn't leave her. It shifted form, settled in her chest, and stayed there. At work, she was distracted. At home, she was anxious. And all the while, Noah kept saying Amara with unshakable delight, as if it were the most natural word in the world. Late one night, Lindsay stood in the nursery doorway and watched as Amara rocked Noah to sleep. His tiny fingers gripped her blouse. His breath slowed, peaceful. And Lindsay realized with a strange clarity that Noah had chosen her, not because of who she had been, but because of who she was now. Still, the past had not been buried. And as more rumors swirled and new doubts were planted, Lindsay knew one thing with certainty. If she was going to protect her son and the woman he so clearly adored, she would need to hear the full story. Not the rumors, not the headlines. The truth. And only Amara could give it to her. The living room was full. Lindsay's parents had arrived earlier that afternoon for a rare family dinner, along with her younger sister Melanie and her husband, Ben. The table had been set with deliberate care. Wine glasses aligned, cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles. It was a quiet attempt at normalcy in the middle of an increasingly uncomfortable storm. Lindsay needed the evening to go well. She needed something to feel stable. Amara had offered to stay a little later, helping with Noah, so Lindsay could enjoy the meal. It wasn't unusual. Amara often extended her hours without asking for extra pay. Lindsay suspected it had less to do with the money, and more with her natural inclination to be useful, to remain close to Noah whenever possible. Dinner moved along with the usual chit-chat. Melanie talked about a conference she had just returned from in Denver. Ben discussed his attempt at home brewing, and Lindsay's father, ever the traditionalist, steered the conversation toward politics until her mother quickly redirected it toward Noah's growth. Every time his name came up, Lindsay felt her throat tighten slightly. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way her father's eyes shifted every time Amara passed by the dining room, or the way her mother smiled tightly at the end of every sentence, as if trying to mask a deeper concern. Amara had kept mostly to the background, refilling drinks, tidying dishes, entertaining Noah on the floor with wooden blocks. Lindsay saw the subtle glances exchanged between her parents every time Amara entered the room, saw the shift in posture, the tiny signals of unease. It was like watching a play in which everyone knew their lines but hated the script. Noah, seated on a soft blanket a few feet from the table, babbled contentedly as he played, occasionally turning to Amara with giggles that echoed through the room. Then, without fanfare, it happened. He looked up, lifted one small finger toward her, and said clearly, "Amara." The room stopped breathing. Forks froze midair. The clinking of glasses ceased. Noah, oblivious of the sudden shift, repeated the word, his tone filled with innocent delight. "Amara." Amara blinked, clearly taken off guard, but managed a soft smile. Lindsay felt her heart race. Her father was the first to speak. "That's his first word." Lindsay nodded slowly. "Yes, it is." His face darkened. He didn't shout. Her father was never one to raise his voice, but the weight of his disappointment was thunderous. "Is that really the kind of influence you want for your child?" Melanie glanced toward Amara, who had instinctively stepped back. Her smile now faded. "Dad," she said cautiously, "don't start." But he didn't stop. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on Lindsay. "You've got this woman in your house every day. And now your son, his first word is her name. Not yours. Not his father's. Hers." Lindsay inhaled. Try and steady herself. "Because she's here with him. She takes care of him. She's good to him." "She's a stranger," he said firmly, "with a past. Don't forget that." Amara didn't flinch. She stood quietly near the wall, hands clasped in front of her, her eyes focused on the floor. She didn't defend herself. She didn't need to. The silence in the room did that for her. Lindsay's mother, ever the peacemaker, attempted to cut through the tension. Maybe it's just because she talks to him more. He hears her name often. It's probably nothing. But no one believed that. Not really. The dinner ended early. Her parents left in silence, her mother whispering something under her breath as she walked past Lindsay, something that sounded dangerously close to "this is what happens when you ignore the signs." Lindsay stayed up after everyone was gone. She paced the kitchen, unable to shake the weight of her father's words. Noah had long since fallen asleep. The house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that doesn't bring peace but presses down on the chest like a stone. Amara came downstairs in her coat, ready to leave. She paused when she saw Lindsay standing alone, wine glass in hand, eyes distant. "I should go," she said softly. Lindsay turned. "Wait." Amara stood still, her expression unreadable. Lindsay took a step forward. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "About what happened, about the other child." Amara looked at her for a long moment, because no one ever really wanted to know. "I do," Lindsay said. "Now I do." Amara nodded, walked over to the couch, and sat down. Lindsay followed, sitting opposite her, heart thudding. "It was a girl," Amara began, 2 years old. Her name was Zoe. Her mother, she wasn't well. I don't say that with judgment, just truth. There were days when she wouldn't come out of her room, other days when she was manic, taking the child out in the middle of the night, refusing to let anyone help. Lindsay listened in stunned silence. I stayed for the child, not for the paycheck. There were days I wanted to quit, days I should have. But Zoe, she trusted me. I couldn't just leave her. What happened that day? Lindsay asked. Amara's voice grew quieter. Zoe had a fever. High. She was burning up. Her mother refused to call the doctor, said it was just a cold. I called anyway. I took her to the hospital without permission. I thought doing the right thing would protect us both. But it didn't. No, Amara said, eyes glistening. The mother was furious. Claimed I'd kidnapped her daughter. Police were called. Zoe was taken into custody for a full day while they sorted it out. She was fine, recovered in 2 days. But the story spiraled. And the family, they knew people, the right people, or maybe the wrong ones. Why didn't you fight it? Lindsay asked. already knowing the answer. I didn't want Zoe to grow up and read a court transcript about her mother. I wanted to protect her even when her mother didn't. Lindsay felt the lump in her throat rise, but she forced herself to speak. You were protecting her, and now you're protecting Noah. Amara met her eyes. I do what I can for the children. Lindsay nodded, unable to speak. The next morning, she watched Amara hold Noah by the window, the two of them framed in the golden morning light. Noah looked up at her, whispered her name again. Not a word now, but a comfort. Amara. And for the first time since the whispers had begun, Lindsay didn't feel conflicted. She felt something else entirely, clarity, no matter what others believed. She had seen the truth in the way Amara moved, in the way she held a child, in the quiet integrity of someone who had suffered deeply and still chosen to love. The name her son spoke first wasn't a mistake. It was a message. The morning after Amara shared her story, Lindsay found herself waking before the sun, eyes open in the stillness of the bedroom, mind alert and heavy with everything that had shifted between them. She hadn't expected to feel relief after the confession, but something about the quiet conviction in Amara's voice had settled an ache Lindsay hadn't realized she was carrying. Still, clarity didn't mean simplicity. The house, the neighborhood, the weight of perception, none of it had changed overnight. And though Amara's truth had brought light, it had also deepened the shadows. Now, Lindsay had to decide what to do with it. At breakfast, the air was thicker than usual. Noah sat in his high chair, smearing banana across his tray, giggling intermittently at something invisible to the adults. Amara moved to the kitchen as she always did, but Lindsay noticed a slight change in her rhythm, more cautious, less fluid. The story she had unburdened wasn't something she could easily tuck away again. It had cost her something to share it, and Lindsay felt the weight of that trust. The decision to ask for the truth hadn't been simple, and hearing it had left Lindsay with 1,000 unspoken questions. But one, above all, lingered. Why had Amara returned to this life? Childcare, the vulnerability, the scrutiny, after what had been done to her. That question refused to leave Lindsay's mind as she drove to work that morning. The voices from the dinner still echoed, particularly her father's. Is that who you want shaping your child? But the tone that haunted her wasn't anger. It was fear, masked as principle. It wasn't about Amara. It was about what Amara represented to them. The possibility that their assumptions, their judgments, had been wrong all along. That week, Lindsay began noticing the shift in the neighborhood more acutely. On Tuesday, a neighbor she had exchanged pleasantries with for years crossed the street to avoid passing her driveway. On Wednesday, the local mothers group email thread excluded her from a weekend playdate that had, until recently, been open to everyone. And on Thursday, Dana, sharp-tongued and ever-present, left a voicemail on Lindsay's phone. I thought you should know, Dana said, voice carefully neutral, that someone filed concern with the county about the child care situation at your home. Probably nothing, but they might follow up. Lindsay stood in her kitchen, phone still pressed to her ear long after the message ended. The implications were clear. Someone had decided that whispering wasn't enough anymore. Now they wanted action. She didn't tell Amara right away, not because she wanted to hide it from her, but because she needed time to figure out what the right response would be. The thought of Amara being questioned again, being dragged into another system that might not see her clearly, made Lindsay sick with anger. That night, after Noah had gone to sleep, Lindsay sat across from Amara at the kitchen table. The house was quiet again, the air humming with the kind of tension that comes before something irreversible. There's been a complaint, she said plainly. Amara didn't react, not with shock, not with fear. She only nodded slowly, as though the news had been expected all along. They'll probably come by, Lindsay continued. Ask questions, maybe more than once. Of course, Amara said softly. I understand. I don't, Lindsay replied, her voice sharp. This isn't fair. You've done nothing wrong. That's not how these things work, Amara said, a tired smile touching her lips. It's not about what I've done. It's about what people believe I'm capable of. Lindsay clenched her hands into fists beneath the table. They're using Noah as an excuse to keep punishing you for something that was never your fault. I know, Amara said, The calm in her voice made Lindsay feel like screaming. How could anyone remain so composed in the face of such persistent cruelty? But then she realized Amara had been living this way for years. She had learned to survive beneath suspicion. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was armor. Lindsay stood, unable to sit any longer. She paced the kitchen, then turned back to Amara with a sudden clarity. "Tell me everything," she said. "Not just what happened. Tell me about you. I want to know who you were before all this, who you are when no one's looking." Amara hesitated, then gestured toward the living room. They sat together on the couch, and slowly, the woman who had become a symbol for so many revealed herself as a person, layer by layer. She had grown up in Birmingham, raised by a single mother who worked night shifts in a hospital. From a young age, Amara learned how to care for others, not out of obligation, but instinct. She'd always been drawn to children, fascinated by their ability to love without hesitation. After college, she became a preschool teacher, working in underserved communities, driven by a belief that every child deserved to feel safe. When the opportunity came to nanny full-time for a high-profile family in Atlanta, she took it, not for prestige, but for the chance to focus all her energy on one child. Zoe had been challenging but sweet, prone to night terrors and sudden tantrums, but also full of affection and curiosity. Amara had grown to love her like her own. The unraveling had been slow. The mother's instability, the father's absence, the long silences followed by explosive demands. And finally, the fever that had forced Amara to choose between obedience and a child's safety. "I knew what it would cost," she said, voice barely audible. "But I couldn't stand by. I couldn't let her suffer just to protect an image." Lindsay listened, eyes wet, heart hollowed out by the quiet tragedy of it all. When Amara finished, there was no dramatic pause, no plea for understanding. Just a woman sitting on a worn couch, sharing the truth because someone had finally asked. The next day, Lindsay took a bold step. She gathered every document she could, letters from the agency that had cleared Amara's background, testimonials from other families who had hired her after the incident, videos of Noah laughing in her arms, recordings of lullabies sung in that warm, steady voice. She wrote a letter, not to the agency, not to the neighbor who had complained, but to the county office that would be conducting the home visit. She attached everything, every piece of evidence that showed who Amara truly was, not just who people assumed her to be. And then she waited. In the days that followed, Amara continued to show up. She kept Noah's routines intact, kept his joy undisturbed. And slowly, something began to shift. Not outside, not in the whispers that still drifted down the sidewalk, but inside Lindsay herself. She was no longer afraid of what people would say, because now she understood what Amara had always known. Silence was never the absence of truth. It was often a place where truth was forced to live when the world refused to listen. The knock came on a gray Wednesday morning, the kind of morning that seemed undecided between rain and stillness. Lindsay was home, having taken a day off in anticipation of the visit, though she hadn't told Amara what time the inspector would arrive. Part of her hoped it wouldn't happen at all, that maybe someone at the county office had seen the package she submitted and decided there was nothing to investigate. But of course, that wasn't how these things worked. When she opened the door, a woman in her late 40s stood there holding a leather folder and wearing a badge clipped to her blazer. Her expression was neutral, but not unkind. "Ms. Carter?" the woman asked. "I'm Danielle Reese. I'm here following up on a report regarding in-home childcare." Lindsay stepped aside. "Yes, I've been expecting you." Amara was upstairs with Noah, unaware that the moment they both feared had finally arrived. Lindsay offered Ms. Reese coffee, which was declined politely, and then invited her into the living room. The folder was opened, a notepad placed gently on the coffee table, and the questions began, soft but clinical. How many hours does the nanny work? Is she ever alone in the house with the child overnight? Have there been any previous complaints? Is the child showing signs of distress or behavioral change? Lindsay answered calmly, carefully, truthfully. She handed over the documentation she had prepared, explaining each page, each note, each photograph. When she showed the video of Noah clapping and repeating Amara while she sang to him, she paused the clip midway, her voice steady but her eyes locked on Ms. Reese. "You should know something," Lindsay said. "That name you'll find in the old report, the one people keep whispering about, she's not a threat. She's the reason my son feels safe. He said her name before mine, not because I failed him, but because she shows up for him every single day with more love and patience than most people manage in a lifetime." Ms. Reese didn't respond immediately. She took notes, nodded occasionally, and maintained a calm, observational demeanor. When the interview portion was complete, she asked to speak with Amara directly. Lindsay hesitated only for a second before calling up the stairs. Amara descended holding Noah, who squirmed happily in her arms. As she entered the room and saw the county official, her smile faltered slightly, but she stood tall, adjusted Noah on her hip, and waited. Ms. Reese rose and extended a hand. "Amara Johnson?" "Yes. I just have a few questions." Noah reached toward Lindsay, who took him gently and carried him into the kitchen, just out of earshot. The voices in the living room remained low, civil, professional. Lindsay paced slowly in the kitchen, pressing kisses to Noah's head, whispering reassurances he didn't need, but she did. After nearly 20 minutes, Amara entered the kitchen. Her expression was unreadable. She handed Noah back, without a word, and walked into the mudroom to retrieve her coat. "She's done," she said quietly. "You'll get a letter." Lindsay followed her to the door. "Amara—" "It's fine," she said, forcing a small smile. "This isn't the first time I've had to prove I'm not a danger. But it should be the last," Lindsay said firmly. Amara looked at her for a long moment, then simply nodded and left without another word. The letter arrived 3 days later. Lindsay tore it open at the mailbox, hands cold despite the sun. The investigation was closed. No violations found. No further action necessary. She exhaled slowly, almost collapsing against the doorframe. It was over, but something inside her knew it wasn't. Not really. That evening, as Noah napped on her chest and the house fell into a quiet rhythm of early dusk, Lindsay opened her laptop and began to write. Not a legal defense, not a private letter, but something public. A post. She titled it simply, "When your son's first word is the name of the woman everyone warns you about." In it, she told the whole story. Not just the fact of the county visit or the neighborhood gossip, but the harder truth, the way fear had nearly robbed her of someone irreplaceable. She described Amara not through credentials, but through moments. The way she spoke softly when Noah was ill, the way she stayed late without being asked, the way she had risked her reputation and her freedom in the past to protect a child who wasn't hers. She admitted to her own doubts, her guilt, the slow unraveling of everything she thought she knew about trust, judgment, and motherhood. She didn't expect the post to reach far. She shared it on her personal blog, linked it to a private Facebook page, and closed the browser. The next morning, it had over 700 shares. By the end of the week, over 20,000. Messages began pouring in. Some from strangers, some from local mothers, some from people who recognized Amara's name and had their own stories to tell. A woman from Atlanta wrote to say her cousin had worked in the same neighborhood as Amara during the time of the case and had always believed she was scapegoated. Another message came from a retired social worker who had watched the original investigation unfold and called the media coverage reckless at best. But the most unexpected responses came from right within Willow Ridge Park. A mother who had once crossed the street to avoid them sent an email asking if Amara was available for part-time work. Someone left a bouquet of flowers on Lindsay's porch with a note that read simply, "We were wrong. Thank you for telling the truth." Lindsay showed everything to Amara, who read in silence, her hands trembling slightly over the printed pages. When she finished, she folded them neatly and looked up. "I didn't expect that," she said. "You deserve it," Lindsay replied. "All of it." Amara's eyes shone, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, the whispers stopped, not all at once, but gradually. The stare softened. The tension in the grocery store aisles disappeared. And in its place, something unexpected bloomed. Respect. People began to see Amara not as a shadow of an old story, but as someone who had been unjustly buried beneath it. Noah continued to grow, words now spilling from him in rapid succession. He said mama and dad more and no, but one word remained consistent, unwavering in tone and joy. Amara. It became his comfort, his chant, his favorite name. And every time he said it, Lindsay felt a quiet triumph rise inside her, not just because of what had been proven, but because she had chosen to listen, not to the noise, but to the truth.